more distorted, and the chords...
What a sound, though. What a rich sound it's coming from.
It gets that lovely, rich, kind of throaty sound which seems to come from here.
And as Vox took off, their engineers would find themselves rubbing shoulders with the big stars. Alan Harding would go on tour with the Beatles to look after their amps. One day, he was in their dressing room on Paul McCartney's 21st birthday.
We had two big security guards come staggering up with this giant box, and it was kind of the outline of 21. Yeah, the big guys, and they staggered with it and got it on the table. Then somehow they kind of unzipped it and it fell apart, and this scantily clad bird come wandering out, walking around the tabletop as a present for Paul. I don't know if he accepted it and took it home, but it was certainly on the table.
In the years since, guitarists with a whole range of styles have loved the AC30.
And that's where you can see the distortion just starts to get, but isn't enough, because obviously all guitarists want the sound with longer sustain. That's kind of sweet and natural sustain, and obviously after that we wanted more and more gain circuits and drive circuits to make us spinal tappy sustain and stuff.
These two pickups set against each other, out of phase, then the Bohemian Rhapsody sort of sound. It is like this kind of, well, instead of this, which is normal, sort of my normal setting, it'll go like this to... It's got so much natural harmonics going for it.
Made me so happy there, so thank you.
And then the amp kind of brings it out, you know, the whole thing, the whole system brings out those high harmonics, so it sounds like an octave higher than it really is.
That's incredible.
Many young musicians today prefer the Vox sound.
I don't know what that does.
But sometimes find the amps to be a bit unreliable.
No, that's just... It was recording, I turned it on and it made the most outrageous sound. It sounded like a rhino being killed. And I had to turn it off and like blow on it and like pat it and tell it to be good, and then managed to get my take out.
Of course, Vox once did their special test to show their amps were reliable. But has Brian May ever had any problems?
Oh, nothing's ever gone wrong.
I don't believe you for a second, Mr. May.
No, well, valves don't travel well, and that has been a problem. Valves are delicate, and they'll suddenly splutter and peg out on you without any warning. You just have to be prepared, and we have a couple of spares. It's worth it. Most things that are worth doing are dangerous and risky, and there is an element of risk to the old the valve amps.
Back in the early 60s, Brian Jones, Keith Richards and the rest of the lads were obviously making a right old song and dance about Vox amps.
And the Stones went one step further than the Beatles and the Shadows. They used the guitars as well.
Vox weren't just making the AC30. They made all sorts of variations of the amplifier. And on top of that, they started producing a whole range of musical instruments, such as the Vox Continental keyboard and lots of guitars.
This is a Vox Phantom. This was Vox's first original design. It was a radical design when it came out, and I guess it still is.
And Brian Jones loved the next model, the Teardrop.
Brian Jones tuning up.
However, the thing about Vox guitars is they weren't very good.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of the early Vox guitars were Fender copies, and they were very poor Fender copies. They didn't play well. Over the years, you know, by the mid-60s, Vox had set out to rectify this reputation. By that time, they were making some quite playable, quite good guitars.
While all this was going on, Vox were in fact making history.
Vox amplifiers in the early 60s were very, very important because they were the sound of the British invasion. Bands such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Hollies, these bands were using not only the Vox amplifiers, but in some cases the Vox guitars. The guitars themselves were radical designs, the Phantom and the Mark III, these beautiful pentagonal shapes or teardrop shapes. They helped to create the new look that the British acts were introducing.
By now, Vox were breaking into America. They came to a deal with the Thomas Organ Company to license making their amps in the States.
Okay, I'd start turning.
To promote the brand, they did what only Americans would do. They built a car with amps embedded inside it, the Voxmobile.
And this thing has 32 guitar inputs. It can handle a bass, a guitar, has a Continental organ on the back. They take it around in music stores around the country where kids could try out all their favorite Vox equipment.
Vox were now so big that when Dick Denny came up with what must be his maddest invention, the guitar organ, he was invited to go on American television.
Mr. Dick Denny, here he is.
They wanted him to explain how it worked.
The idea is to make a guitar sound like an organ.
Oh, well, he certainly did that.
As generators inside, which, as you press the notes down, it makes electrical contact. Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away.
When you find yourself singing on network TV in the States, you know your company must be a success.
Raines did this arrangement here, huh?
This is the only known footage of Dick. Of course, Vox supplied the Beatles with equipment, but they catered for other big stars as well, such as a custom keyboard for Sooty.
It was a two-manual thing. The bottom one actually played notes, and then the top one, you pressed things and springs came out, and things blew up and all the rest of it.
Precision engineering that makes Sooty go with a bang.
Following the success of the amplifiers, Dick Denny started experimenting with gadgets which would further change the sound of the guitar.
Dick slumbered into our studio, because he used to sit down on the desk and have a coffee, with this OXO box. And he plugged the guitar in this OXO box with an amplifier. And he played this terrible distortion guitar. It was like, We said, Dick, all the years Vox have been trying to get a clean sound, and you've devised this racket, you know. And he said, trust me, bruv. Trust me, it'll go. And within 4 weeks, the Rolling Stones made Satisfaction, which went... And so the Vox Fuzzbox was born. But while Dick Denny was in Dartford, messing with the sound of the guitar, the Rolling Stones were on the road, messing with Alan Harding's head.
Tell me about breakfast with the Rolling Stones.
Well, they used to embarrass me, because they quite often... they would come down, at least one or two of them, would come down with women's dresses on, like long frocks or something, yeah? And I used to be embarrassed, and I used to drift to the other side of the restaurant.
Why were they dressed in women's clothes?
Well, I think the drugs used to have a telling on the night before, probably.
Any of the Vox employees in the 60s could suddenly find themselves hanging out with superstars.
Well, I was a sales assistant for the Vox shop in Chancross Road at the time, and Jimi Hendrix came in, so he's trying out some effects pedals and things. I asked him if he could show me how to play Purple Haze. So he said, yeah, sure, no problem. Next thing you know, he was, after 10 seconds, was showing me how to play it. It's amazing, I got a free lesson off Jimi Hendrix.
And the Vox sound suits many of today's musicians.
I went on a tour with one of my friends and played through his Vox one night, and I was like, this is so amazing, this is perfect.
I would say that a Vox has kind of a warmth to it, especially my experience has been with the vintage ones. There's like that warmth that's kind of similar to vinyl.
At its peak, Vox were employing about 150 people and were subcontracting out work to several other companies.
Vox were flying high. They couldn't make their products fast enough. What could possibly go wrong?
The business was so big, the factory here couldn't cope.
Tom Jennings desperately needed money to fund the manufacture and keep up with demand. So he sold a controlling interest in his company to the Royston Group. They were a series of military electronics companies. One of their main products was the new black box, which records what happens when a plane crashes. But it was a bad move.
Instead of giving Vox money, they were in fact draining money out of the company to help finance this research and development on the black box.
But then they lost the black box contract altogether, and that was the end of the Royston Group.
Royston went down and took Vox with them.
The workers carried on, oblivious to the fact that the receivers were meeting with Tom.
He came literally from the boardroom and he said, the adjective, guys have fired me, you know, I'm out. And he had tears rolling down his cheeks.
I'll never forget the day he left. He was crying. He said, I've lost my company. I said, I know. And he was crying, and I've never seen a man cry before. He was so upset.
And so the Jennings era of Vox came to an end. Tom Jennings took Dick Denny and a few other Vox employees and started all over again, with a new company making the Jennings brand of amplifiers. But they weren't anywhere near as successful. Of course, Vox didn't disappear. Over the last 40 years, the brand was sold on through a series of companies, and today is owned by Korg. The amplifiers are made in China. The people who used to work for Vox in the 60s have fond memories about their time in Dartford.
I've never been in a job since that I loved so much.
We were all so excited, and we thoroughly all enjoyed our jobs.
Going to work every day was a joy. Was a joy.
And any guitarist worth his salt will kill to get his hands on a genuine 60s valve Jennings Musical Industries Vox AC30. Made at the time when Dartford found itself at the centre of rock and roll.
It takes stones of all shapes and sizes to build a decent nest, and finding ones that are just right is not easy. So some penguins turn to a life of crime. Discover this world beyond imagination.